Hey there, friends. I know I told you I'm not preaching the next 2 weeks. That's still true, but I wanted to take some space this morning to tell you about where we're at in discussions of our relaunching process. I know Travis talked about services going on through the end of May, so I wanted to give you an update on that. And there's a lot of things to update you on with that, making sure that we're continuing the full transparency that we've agreed to. As we've talked with other churches and leaders, one thing is very clear in all those conversations, and with conversations with other businesses and nonprofits and other organizations in the community, is that we need a clear plan on how relaunching is going to work. So our consistory has tasked a subcommittee that's going to write up a detailed plan on how we will relaunch. And it was just good to do that. We've had some skeletons of things out there, but it was good to kind of task a subcommittee. And just to let you know who that subcommittee is, it'll be myself, obviously, Lindsay Riley, Jeff Stormo from our consistory, and Debbie Rademacher. And they kind of represent a different types of cross-section, but we're trying to keep it small enough so we feel like we can be the most efficient and expedient in our work with that. So that said, the reason I mention those names is because if you have feedback or suggestions, those are the people to ask and present them to as we continue to have our discussions about relaunching. And so I want to remind us before we get into it, what Paul says to the Ephesians church in chapter 4. Listen to what he says in verses 1-6. He says, I therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to the one hope that belongs to your call. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. Now, Paul mentions this calling we have as a church first and foremost. If you read the previous chapters in Ephesians, that calling is to the gospel. The calling is about proclaiming and sharing the gospel. As a church, we are ministers of reconciliation, as we talked about, especially the last couple of weeks. So how we treat one another as the church, how we live with each other, how we participate in mission together, is a huge testimony to the world on the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so our consistory has agreed to a set of values that's going to guide us through this process. It's important to start with a set of values because we have to have some sort of way of coming back to things when we make decisions. What are the things that are really important to us in this process that we're not going to negotiate on? And let that guide our writing and decision making as we go throughout. So here's the values we have in this relaunching process. Value number 1. We value the guidance of medical experts and government leaders. Many are working behind the scenes to keep the most people safe. And in this crazy age of outrage and how politics can really get involved in a lot of things, we do value the work that they're doing. You know, most people do have the best intentions. And we are paying close attention to the current reopening plan, especially from the state of Michigan, and trying to walk alongside it faithfully as a church. Value number 2, we value meeting in person. I hope you've recognized it during this pandemic how valuable it is to meet people face to face. It's actually quite beautiful for me. It's been a great truth where, there's been a struggle, to gather on Sundays even for worship weekly, where, sometimes it feels like a chore or an extracurricular activity. But I think we realized during this pandemic how valuable it is to gather together face to face. And we want to tell you that we value that as well. And we look forward to the time where we can all be back together face to face. But we want to do everything we can to facilitate ways to see each other face to face as much as possible while keeping in mind our witness to the community and making sure about safety. Number 3, we value community with growth informed by the gospel and recognize that this can be done in a variety of mediums. Now, while we haven't been able to meet together physically, I think some of you would agree that we have witnessed community happen in the midst of this pandemic, right? Even though we haven't seen each other face to face as much, or some of us at all. I know some of you have talked about Sundays where there is a sense of community that happens. Yes, not the same as being in the building and being together with people, but there is something there. Even in the chat window, just chatting with other people, or on Facebook, if you watch that way, there's community there. There's our community groups that still continue to meet on Zoom or Teams or Blue Jeans or whatever or Google, whatever you use, right? You've got our prayer meetings twice a week. You've got people getting meals. You got the phone calls and texts that are going all the time, right? And there's also our phone tree, right, where people are getting contacted on a weekly or bi-weekly basis to check in how they're doing and see what needs they have. So just because we're not meeting in person right now, it doesn't invalidate all the ways that church is happening, because the church is not a building, right? The church is a people. Value number 4, we're aware of the perceived leadership role we play in the larger community. Let me just be direct. Mission is not optional for us at New Ground. And it really shouldn't be optional for the church at all. We are called to love God, make disciples, and send leaders. That's our mission, right? And that also means that the decisions we make, we have to have the greater local community in mind with that, right? We're asking, what does it look like to lift up a community, to be a blessing, to be good news to the community? So that's important as a value. If we're going against the community in every single thing, if we're not being wise about that and having those conversations, then I don't think we're being good with our mission. Number 5, we value the protection of life, especially the most vulnerable. Some in our church community are immunocompromised, including this guy as your pastor. And we want to make sure as a church that we honor the choices that some have made to keep their distance from others physically so that they can protect themselves or the ones that they love. Number 6, we will not pressure others into making decisions about their comfort and safety. So for example, some of you want to come back on Sundays. Look, me too. Trust me, I am itching to come back physically. However, like I told you last week, when we have pretty much a 50-50 split in our congregation, with who don't desire to meet, don't desire to meet, we don't want people to be forced to make a choice of a either or, right? We're looking for options of both and, but that takes some work, that takes some evaluation, that takes some long-term planning as well, hence why we need the written plan. And then finally, number 7, and this is a big one, we seek to honor differing concerns and desires with respect to safety, reopening, etc., and approach our Christian brothers and sisters with gentleness, humility, and respect, as well as grace when we differ. I know it's a big one. We'll leave it on the screen for a little bit. We will not participate in the divisive rhetoric and polarization that our world likes to do. We just don't want to do that, especially as the church. And so we acknowledge that not everyone in our community is going to like or agree with some of the decisions we make. Simply put, you know this, you can't make everyone happy. It's a hard lesson to learn. For me, I want to make everyone happy, but you just can't, right? And so we're committed to make sure that those who do disagree with decisions that we make, or those who have some constructive criticism, are not only heard, but that we have those conversations and treat them with dignity, as we talked about in our dialogue series. And I think, this is a major part of our witness as the church, that our commitment to Christ compels us to prioritize unity in our peacemaking, especially when we don't agree with one another. So at this moment, as far as our plans go, we are planning to continue online through the month of June. I know some of you will be disappointed to hear that, but also that could change. It could be sooner, it could be later. We don't know. But for now, the way we're planning ahead, at least to keep ahead and for efficiency's sake, planning online through the end of June. Now, our government has kind of, they've gone into somewhat of what phase 4 of their 6-phase plan, which is, 10 people or less as part of a gathering is concerned. However, just yesterday, extended the stay-at-home order till June 12th. And so, as things are changing, we're trying to adapt to that as much as possible. So we'll plan through the end of June. It's almost like we have to take a month at a time in a lot of ways. In the meantime, our subcommittee and our consistory is going to be working really hard, continuing to get this plan written as fast as possible, with making sure that we do the work necessary to feel very clear and that plan is communicated well to you before we actually launch into those things. We want to be the most prepared that we can be in that process. I told you that subcommittee of myself and Lindsay Riley, Jeff Stormo, and Debbie Radmaker, so that you know who to talk to, ask questions about. The easiest way to do that, send an email to info@newgroundchurch.org. That's the easiest way to send us something, and we'll just put reopening, feedback, questions, whatever, and we'll forward it on, and we'll kind of put it all in the pot as we're continuing to have those discussions and write that plan. I miss seeing you face to face as well. I really do. I am itching to get back together, and I'm sure you do too. At the same time, as we navigate this unprecedented time in front of us, let's continue to do it with grace and love, right? And let's continually pray for strength, especially for our mental fortitude, as we plan what it looks like for a new normal. These values I'm going to put up on our live page as well, so that you can look at them again in case you have questions about that. And so if you want to look through that again and see it in writing, we'll put that up on our live page as well at newgroundchurch.org/live.